it's a big cocktail party conversation, right? People are like, what's land worth today, right? I mean, it's like this time of year, you're staying at a Christmas party and, you look at somebody and you go, well, you know, agricultural land on the Delmarva, good ground is really at $10,000 an acre. That's a, that is a, that's a number that's appeared more regularly now in just the last 5 years. And we, while we're a brokerage company and a natural resource based group, we study data. What I think is really interesting, the delta between land value and land income has continued to increase. And the economists call this K graph. So land values go like this, and land income goes like this. This has been going on for probably nearly 100 years. What I do think it's a reflection of the fact that people more and more value outdoor spaces.
Welcome, everybody, for our December wildlife webinar, Land and Wildlife Speaker Series. My name is Luke McCauley. I'm the Wildlife Management Specialist for University of Maryland Extension. And I'm excited to have a great guest here to speak with us. We're going to have a conversational style webinar today. It would do us a huge favor if you hit the subscribe button on that YouTube channel. It helps to get the word out to other people. We try to have an impact on the landscape and improve management of the land for habitat. So if you can do that, other people will get access to these videos. They'll get suggested. So it's a great help for us. Excited today to have Ben Alder. He's the principal and founder of the Land Group. Their tagline is "We Sell Dirt." You may have seen some of their advertisements around. He's going to be speaking about the role of real estate professionals in achieving wildlife habitat conservation. We're going to be discussing a lot of topics on this. I first heard about Ben, I think through your advertisements for the Land Group. I didn't know your name. But a man named Dan Murphy with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service mentioned you. And we were having a conversation one day, and he says, man, if I could do it all over again, man, I'd just try and buy a lot of land and just do conservation on that land. It's just like something he was passionate about, something I think a lot of us are. So I think having this series to talk about, the ability to purchase land and make it into something your own, make it into a wildlife paradise is an important thing for a lot of people. And a key piece is being able to acquire that property and then think about what you do with it after that. So I think having this real estate angle will be an interesting one to talk about. To prime the discussion, if any of you attended the August webinar, I talked about this. This is research we published last summer. And this is the land ownership distribution in Maryland based on size class. And so on the x-axis, on the horizontal axis on the bottom, it's less than 1 acre. This is 1 to 3 acre size class. And it goes into larger and larger size classes as you move to the right. The red bars are the percentages of land that are found in each of these size classes in Maryland. The blue bars are the percentage of owners found in each of these size classes. So you can quickly see there's a whole lot of owners in less than 1 acre. This makes sense. We have towns and suburban areas. 82% of our owners in the state are in that smaller size class. But a lot of our land falls in these larger size classes, greater than 5 acres. If you add this up, it's about just a little bit over 72% of the land area is in properties that are greater than 5 acres, but it's only 5% of owners. And you have the converse over here on the left, where you have 95% of the owners have less than 5 acres. So there's this real interesting dichotomy in land management and land use in the state, where you have very few number of people that really have an outsized influence in terms of the landscape. So something just to prime the discussion. And then on top of that, you think, well, don't we have a lot of parks and state forests? In Maryland, 86% of our land is privately owned. These are those same size classes on the bottom category. And if the green bar represents the proportion of land that's privately owned. So even though we have a lot of big parks, we have Blackwater National Refuge, we have big state forests, even in these biggest size classes of bigger than 250 acres, private landowners and private land holding still dominates the percentage of land in these categories. So the private markets for land are really crucial for the landscape and for habitat. So That's part of why I wanted to bring in Ben. Ben, well, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And I did some digging on you on your history, and not, a lot of people might not know your background.
Okay.
So I found that I think you're pretty unique in terms of real estate agents or real estate brokers, and that you have a natural resources background. You want to give us a little bit of information on where you came from, what you studied, and your first years out of college.
Sure. No, Luke. So thanks for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I really like the work that you do, and getting to know you over the last year. We've talked about this for a while, so I'm glad we were able to do this. And I really appreciate having this platform to talk and meet. And this is really a lot of fun. Yeah. So I do have it's kind of a different flavor of background to be a broker where I am today. It's funny though. I don't think it's totally by mistake, although I don't remember having an exact plan, but I did one of those little books when I was in seventh grade, maybe, or sixth grade, something like that. And in the book, I made a drawing of myself being a real estate agent. This is actually true. Um, and it was either that or play for the Orioles. Those are the two things I wanted to do. And the Orioles thing didn't work out, so I figured I wasn't going to play on TV. So I had to do my schoolwork. I did that at GW, and I always loved just being outside. I grew up with my father, who introduced me to hunting and the Anamessex River, where I'm fortunate enough to live today. I all of those days, all of those sunsets, just drew me to want to be connected and be outdoors and just really figure out a way to marry a way to make a living with the resource. And I did. I spent a little bit of time out of college doing work on Capitol Hill with Ducks Unlimited, and then found my way into a position as a private lands biologist with DU in about 1997. It was when the initial CREP program was launched here in Maryland. CREP was, it's just that extension of CRP, and a lot of money got piled up at Ducks Unlimited. Chesapeake Bay Foundation was actually a partner at that time, and they put us all to work. A wonderful foundation, frankly, that many people don't know is here, led to DU putting those biologists on the ground. They're called the Knapp Foundation. Joseph P. Knapp. Fun fact: Joseph P. Knapp is the founder of Ducks Unlimited, going all the way back to 1937. And I actually had a breakfast at the Knapp Foundation just the other day, and they are just the best people. And one of the things I learned about Joseph P. Knapp, I know I'm probably down a rabbit hole in a second, but I think it's interesting because Mr. Knapp was really focused on education. And really what we did with the Knapps and what DU did and what all the partners did when CREP was launched is we did a lot of education. And when we sat at the kitchen table, we sat in the barn, we sat in the truck. And I was 20 nothing years old too, which is kind of fun. I would show up at these farms talking about, ducks and quail and buffers. And, I was 20 years old. And a lot of times I think these old guys and gals would look at me and go like, what are you doing here? There's got to be somebody else. Please tell me you're sending somebody else. So I did. I was sort of thrown into the fire. We enrolled thousands and thousands of acres through that CREP program. DU at the time had a stewardship program, which they have today, where they're putting money back on private lands, which you alluded to in your talk. Conservation in Chesapeake all rests with private lands. And what I saw the true story is I helped one guy buy a farm just as sort of an advisor very early when I was at DU. And I was like, that was pretty cool. And I knew a lot more than that guy that has a realtor pin on his lapel. And so that got me thinking about Land Group and what it would be like to have a group of professionals that are resource oriented, but that provide brokerage services. And I built a company before, um, but it was called Conservation Lands. And I had a bunch of partners in that. We were all DU guys, and it was a lot of fun, but nobody wanted to do brokerage. So over time, that we had ended up doing a lot of FSP work or TSP work, and that company ended up getting sunsetted, and I was able to find a new group of folks, and we built TLG. We built what today is the Land Group, and there's 18 of us now around the watershed. And I still think in terms of watershed, I still think of working on the resource in that way, and which is obviously very different for a real estate company, but that's how we think. And we're very fortunate to have foresters and folks from NRCS and surveyors and folks that are close to the resource, and then they later gained a real estate license and background, and so we've been able to marry the two, and I think do some really good work because of it.
Right. So, I think I heard in one of your old podcasts you said you've not hired people with real estate agents. You hire almost nobody has had real estate agents coming into your organization.
Yeah, and I don't mean any disrespect to my friends in the industry in any way whatsoever, but the land business and the industry as it is, it doesn't really train very well, in my opinion. And so I've wanted the person that understands, the resource, wetlands, waterways, wildlife. I've wanted that first as sort of what underwrites us. And then, all right, let's then layer on top a real estate license and an understanding of the law. And, by the way, go have a good friend that's an attorney to, always help you make good decisions. I've learned a ton from all those legal folks that we've worked with over the years. But that's been sort of our model. And I think I've only broken my rule once, maybe twice. It's kind of a dumb way to build a real estate company, but it's worked so far.
Right. Well, I think it gives you a unique niche for sure, and serving a certain clientele. Well, one thing I think maybe starting at a very high level. I'm curious as an agent or as a broker, when you come across properties, I'm curious, like, how would you go around across vetting them? Like, when you see a property, do you start thinking about a property as this is really a wildlife property, or this is an agricultural property? Do you think about transitioning them out? How do you start thinking about that? And how does that process work? Do you end up getting buyers coming to you saying, I want a wildlife property, and then you try to fit them into slots? Can you share a little bit about that process of vetting a property and deciding what's the best fit for somebody?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a lot of ways we do this. Let's talk first about working with somebody who wants to buy a farm. Luke, you call me up and say, I want to buy a farm, and let's just use the perfect scenario that everybody wants is I want 125 acres and I want 65 of it tillable, and I want the balance in hardwoods, and I want to be on a small creek, and I want to be 20 minutes from my other house. That's the perfect storm. So vetting the property to me really starts with geography for you, for the buyer is like, okay, really how far can you stand to be away from your home, your farm, your other home, or is this going to be home now? Like, that's a big deal. So starting with geography is really where I start. Then once we get into, all right, we want to be in Dorchester County, we want to be in Somerset, we want to be in Queen Anne's. From there, it's what are your goals? Are you an upland guy? Are you a waterfowl guy? Are you looking for, and I swear this is true, I help somebody buy a farm simply for pollinators. They love butterflies. And I learned so much about butterflies and pollinators that summer. They just basically wanted to go into a farm and create meadows. And that's what they wanted. So it's really finding out what the person's buzzers are. What do they want? What do they see? You have to coach them because not everybody sees it. They can't just walk on a farm and go, oh, well, there's the dove field and there's the pollinator garden and, the soils are good back there for an impoundment. That's really where our background as biologists, I'll say we're, biologist light. Like I would never claim to do what you do today. But to have our background and knowledge of where things go and how they fit on the landscape, that's really the vetting, right? And, if we've got some guys that chase us right now for waterfowl farms, it's like the thing right now, it feels like. And it's also, I think you find yourselves in things that make you excited. And I get excited about ducks. I mean, I'm a duck nut, always have been. And so I think you attract what you think about. I think we can all accept that. So I have a lot of people that want a waterfowl farm. And so it all starts with dirt, right? I mean, it all starts as where's the heavy soils? Where's the silt loams? What's hydric, non-hydric? Can we put water on that even though it's a non-hydric soil? You've got to be able to look at that farm literally in seconds or look at a soils map in seconds and know good or no go. That not everybody can do. And that's one of our biggest plus ones. And there's another thing that I've only recently learned how much this matters. What you're next to matters immensely. And you as a wildlife biologist that can talk about corridors and connectivity in the landscape and, how animals move. Man, I've really learned a lot about that. Now, it's hard to get that granular for a client, like to say, okay, we're only going to buy something that checks this box, that box, and that box in terms of what it's connected to. But I will say what I've learned over the years is why farms are great for waterfowl and not great for waterfowl comes down to so much. What is it next to? And what is the guide up the creek or down the creek or out the river or up the river doing that disturbs the flyway or doesn't disturb the flyway? So there's a lot of factors that go into shaping a farm that's an A+ farm to a C-. But I will say this, even with all this real specific stuff I'm telling you, I'll be honest with you, some days I don't feel like I know anything. We sold a 30 and keeping all interest, innocent, everybody innocent here. We sold a 30-acre property a couple years ago. There was a puddle in the middle of this farm. Okay, I literally got stuck going back on this track. But there was a puddle, and there was 200 blue-winged teal in it. I swear it was late winter, early spring, February-ish. And I'm back there and I'm going, this is different. And I could hear them peeping. But as I got to the hedgerow, I saw them and they flushed and then they came right back. So fast forward about 5 years later, you can sit on this man's farm that bought those 30 acres in an evening and watch. And your listeners are going to be like, that guy's full of it. But I swear, I've sit at this farm and watched 5,000 ducks come into a 30-acre property. Now, ask me why that is. I have no clue, other than to say wildlife imprints. And they find certain places, for all those reasons of what we were saying, attractive. And maybe the rest of it's just God. I don't know.
Right. I've heard the term X marks the spot, and sometimes there is just a spot that they want to be at. And
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I shared a link. You mentioned soils. I shared a link to the USDA Web Soil Survey, which it takes a few clicks and some expertise in there to find how to find your hydric soils. But that's a great resource that I usually go to quickly on a property to get a quick sense of where. And for the audience who don't know this, hydric soils are those that hold water historically, tend to be more clay content, and are ideal places where wetlands may have once been before being drained or could be created into wetlands.
Right.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you say other land uses nearby, what are some of the things that you found that would disturb like a waterfowl flyway?
I'm surprised by some of the things that what comes to mind immediately are some of the things that don't disturb waterfowl, which is really interesting. I've been on Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Have you ever been up there? And there's thousands of ducks, and just for the record, they blow stuff up there all day long. So I think what we're talking about in terms of disturbance is you and me. Like it's not noises, it's not truck traffic, it's not mundane stuff like that that an animal doesn't feel, right? Like it's an energy thing to me. But when you and I are walking along the creek, or there's just a lot of humans in a given area, that to me is what disturbs waterfowl specifically. They really need to feel like they're not being watched. Like I think ducks just they know when you're there. I can't explain it, but they do. I mean, their line of sight is actually fascinating. I'm not smart enough to explain their ocular ability, but I know they can literally almost see behind them. And there was an article in Ducks Unlimited, I think, this summer maybe that talked about that a little bit, about not moving in the blind when the ducks are flying away from you because they can still see you, dude. So, yeah, what I really think the less people around a waterfowl farm and the way you drive through the farm, the way your neighbors drive around the property or use the property in terms of, I really keep coming back to it, but I think it's true. It really comes back to human disturbance. And when I was doing my master's work, that for the record, I actually never finished. You can yell at me, you're a PhD. I never published it, but I did behavioral studies with black ducks in widgeon, and watching these ducks just sit and loaf and feed and chase each other. They do not like, if I move the wrong way, they're gone. And you have to be so still, because they know you're there. I think a lot of it comes down to human use, not necessarily other outside land uses that affect, wildlife farms.
So, like suburban development, is that something that just because there are a lot of humans, or do they acclimate to that sort of standard human activity, or is it more like farm activity and people moving and being out?
I think I think in suburbia, we'll say there's just a lot of people on the sidewalks. There's a lot of people walking their dogs at night. There's a lot of vehicular traffic. It's very different. Like if you had the perfect wetland ecosystem next door to 1,000 homes, I don't think that gets the same habitat use as that same ecosystem removed from that. Having said that, there are species, obviously our eastern mallard and are a very adaptive Canada goose. They're everywhere, and we're learning that these mallards nest in flower pots. I mean, DU and all the people that are doing telemetry studies, I don't think we understand Mr. Mallard very well, even though we've been studying the stuff, going back into the 50s. We've got tons of data out there, but I think this telemetry stuff is going to teach us a lot. And then it's really going to teach us, I saw some cool stuff about what that hen needs and what her habitat footprint needs to be, because she travels a lot. And that was one of the things that when I was reading that study, I was pretty impressed by that. I mean, her habitat needs when she moves those little guys around is a lot bigger than what we think. And I was really impressed by that. So if you accept that, and to protect a nesting bird, you've really got to give them a lot of habitat around the nesting site. I was surprised by that.
We have a couple of questions coming in on the chat, and they're great ones. And I was hoping we'd get to this one. Now we'll just go straight to it. A couple of questions. So Doug and Deborah both sort of echoed the same theme of a question of talking about how do you manage a farm for conservation, make it conservation, but also financially viable. For example, do you are there certain types of land use like solar, agriculture to be able to generate enough income to pay a mortgage, which is going to be, I think, could be somewhat difficult depending on what you got. Also, Deborah mentioned she put her land into a mouth easement for forestry, but it was a one-time payment. Are there any sort of ongoing revenue options that are consistent with conservation? And I got a few things in my mind on this, but I'll let you go first, and I'm sure we'll do some ping pong back.
Sure. Yeah. No, we can definitely sort of go back and forth on this one. So I use the term, monetizing the farm. It's kind of an interesting way to look at it. And, there's a lot of different programs out there, and we'll say there's, private money through groups like, Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, Eastern Shore Land Conservancy, Lower Shore Land, all those NGO pots of money. Then there's the Farm Bill programs. Then there's these ecosystem service programs out there, which I'd put mitigation, carbon, stream mitigation, forest mitigation. I'd put all those kind of things in that bucket. I think the easiest one is, and the most eligibility is those Farm Bill programs. And, Farm Bill is we're talking about going back into the 80s. It's a very mature, robust set of practices that you can do. And nearly any farm, there's something you can do on your farm through the Farm Bill. And I think the biggest thing that I think matters about it is that it's all incentive based, right? Because no one's walking on your farm and going, hey, you have to put this buffer to clean the water coming off the ag field. No, it's an incentive based program. So you can put 100-foot, strip of native warm season grasses along a farm field, get paid $200 an acre for it, which you may not be getting because it's marginal land and that farmer doesn't want to pay $200 an acre to till it. So maybe you're making the farm more profitable, but you're now also monetizing your farm in a different way. Soil rental rates today, in fact, are getting ready to go up right now. I was just talking to one of my friends at FSA. The soil rental rates in Maryland are well north of 200. Most of them are. Or excuse me, with the bonuses under CREP, they're well over 200. Maryland and Delaware, all very similar. Delaware has a program under what's called WRE, and all of our states, have these programs because, again, remember, federal level.
And just for people who don't know, let's name the acronyms for them.
Yeah. So
CREP is
So CREP is the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program.
And let me briefly give a little background on how that differs then from CRP, which is Conservation Reserve Program. They're actually the same program, but my understanding is the state will chip in an additional bonus payment to make it particularly incentivize certain practices that NRCS has. Is that?
Yeah, the state can provide money. All the state programs around the country, like Iowa, I think was the first one that had it. Then Maryland was a leader at the time. But yeah, so the state can contribute, and the soil rental rates tend to be a little higher. The practices can be a little bit different than just straight CRP. It's a continuous sign up, which is typically very different than regular CRP, and it's way more incentivized. CRP was built, as you know, Luke, it was really built as a land set aside as a commodity control measure, which goes all the way back to the first Farm Bill with Mr. Henry Wallace. Anyway, that's like the 30s, so we're like post Dust Bowl. But CRP's founded in that. CREP is really about finding ways to make CRP work in states like Maryland that didn't have good CRP sign-ups. And so today, CREP I think there's a little bit more life in the program than there has been for years. And then I was getting ready to mention WRE. So that is a program that's called the Wetland Reserve Enhancement Program. In the last Farm Bill, they changed the names of all these. So for like an old guy like me, I used to call it WRP. It was a Wetland Reserve Program. Now it's WRE. I don't know. I didn't get asked about the renaming in the Farm Bill. But WRE in Delaware, their incentive payments now it's an easement. They're knocking on the door $10,000 an acre. So going back to the question in terms of how can I, monetize my farm, If you've got wet woods that's ditched, if you've got floodplain along the woods that's been ditched and historic wetlands degraded, and it's not good farmland, and you're just tired of watching the farmer get stuck there, WRE is a really good program, and it arguably and simply it pays really well. Now that is a permanent easement program, which is very different than CREP. CREP is simply a program that enrolls you for 10 to 15 acres, 10 to 15 years. So it's a little less, hey, I've changed my farm permanently kind of approach. But it can add year-to-year income, going back to the soil rental rate, whereas the WRE is a permanent easement. It's a one-time payment, much like your listener who was talking about their MALF program and their MALF one-time payment. But a program, and Luke, you may be able to comment on this more than I, because I'm only really learning about it, but CSP, the Conservation Security Program?
Stewardship Program, I believe.
Stewardship Program, thanks. I'm learning about it on my farm right now, and there's a lot of practices that you can do actually on woodland and, on timber that can pay you to manage your timber better for wildlife, water quality, etc. So I don't know if you've had any experience with CSP.
I am in the same boat as you. We're focusing now on a property I'm helping manage on CRP, but I think CSP is one that it seems less restrictive. The payments seem quite good, and again, it does seem like it's heavy forestry focused. I know some landowners who have enrolled in it. I think they've been pretty happy, especially for timber stand improvement efforts to enhance your woods for wildlife in all sorts of ways. So yeah, I think that's another program to think about. And I'll also mention EQIP, which is also one-time payments to do actions on your property. Again, not a recurring revenue, but it can help you if you want to do something for wildlife. It can help you do a one-time practice.
And EQIP pays, most of those practices are like 100% cost share, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I think a lot of them can be, yep. Okay, we got a few more questions coming in here. I want to stick on this topic for a little bit longer, though. One thing, other sources of revenue. So we talked about farm bill programs, easements, permanent easements. The farm bill is 10 to 15-year contracts. Easements are permanent sort of protection of your land. And it's different types of payments. One's recurring every year for those 15 years, 10 or 15 years. The other's a one time. What other kinds of things? I have one in mind. Other kind of things you can get income from, but maintain the conservation value. I was thinking about hunting and like hunting leases.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Like, there is that. I mean, hunting revenue and agricultural income. Let me talk about ag income just for a second, real quick. In this region, and when I talk about it, I think when I talk about the region, I'm Chesapeake Bay watershed, 5 states, and that conversation with the farmer, I think a lot of people miss that opportunity. There's a couple things that are really cool about it. One is you can go to your farmer and not say, look, I just want you to pay more. It doesn't have to be about that. It can be, actually, I want a market rent lease rate, but it can also be, hey, and by the way, I'm willing to give you a 5 to 7 year lease that gives them an asset that they can bank on and do the proper soil nutrient maintenance that they want to do anyway, but they're afraid to do it because they're on a year-to-year deal. So there's a two-way street on this. You can go and say, look, I want a good market rate. You've been paying me $75. It's really probably worth $1.50. But you know what? I want you to be here the long term. So let's do a 5-year lease. Let's do a 7-year lease. That's a really good conversation to have with your farmer. The other thing is, and a lot of people undervalue this, by God, do a lease. Give that farmer a real lease that sets up terms when they pay it. Is it a harvest payment and a mid-year payment? Do those things. It's a very undervalued thing. And I think it's undervalued by the farmer too, because to him and his balance sheet, having a lease, a 7-year lease, helps him with farm credit. It helps him with his portfolio of how good is his income. It's much better if he's got a good written lease. So don't undervalue that. The second thing with hunting income, it's just going through the roof. I mean, we're at $30 an acre, sort of like no matter what. I think when I started in this business, I mean, you were $5 an acre ish. So for good quality habitat, you can command a very strong lease. I'm not suggesting go out there and gouge your tenants. That's not what I'm saying. Don't do that. But go out there, make sure you have a good conversation with them. Make sure you got the right people on your farm. Make sure you know everybody that's on your farm. That's, to me, probably is the biggest landowner nightmare, is you lease to Bob, right? But Bob brings 10 other buddies, and that's not good for you because Bob can't even control his other 10 buddies, especially the one that hunts every other day.
So we're actually working on a lease right now for this property I'm working on, and there are a lot of things you can build into your lease to try and protect yourself from those situations. Building in no subletting, no outfitting, and things like that, and maybe even you could even ask for lists of approved hunters prior to the hunting starting, and guests require some notification of approval, so you have some sense of how many new people are coming into the property. So there are ways to help manage those situations too.
And I think that's undervalued. And, one of the things we do now today is we actually don't do hunting leases. We do what's called a hunting license. So a lease gives you I haven't talked about real estate. I'll try not to, but I'll do a real estate thing real quick. A lease gives you a certain right in a property that's different than a license. If you want to kick somebody off your farm, it's a lot harder to get them off in a court if they have a lease. If you give them a license is terminatable literally at any moment. And I represent some very large landowners in the country, and I've learned this from them. So, people that lease out 10 and 20 and 30,000 acres at a time, they won't give you a lease. They'll give you a license. And it's a very, very good practice to take and very good position to take as a landowner. So just another little fun tip.
On the ag piece, how do you know what the market rates are? I will say I know there are some published rates the county extension agents will sometimes post, or the NRCS has farm rental rates for different types of soil. Do you find those are a good indicator of what's truly on the market, or do you shop around to different farmers to get a sense?
Yeah, no, I think what's published is everybody fibbing. Okay. The market rate in agriculture is discoverable, and we run various opportunities where we, essentially it's a sealed bid process, and we've done this probably no less than 20 times. And I've done it for very large companies, corporate entities, and when we bid out a farm, typically we have 25 bids, we'll say, on a few 100-acre opportunity. What's really interesting about the 25 bids is there's a spread. There's 5 at the top that are all really close together. Then there's a small group in the middle. I mean, and this is just repeated over all these activities. It's kind of interesting. There's this really high number at the top, and there'll be 4 or 5 folks that are at that number. Then there's a group in the middle that, are 30 to 40% off that top number. And then there's a ton of people at the bottom where it's almost just like they didn't get the memo. And I'll tell you why I think that is. Ag rates in our region is the biggest secret ever. It is. I mean, nobody talks about it. It's like the elephant in the room. So, I mean,
there's also a relatively small number of farmers at times, and they all know each other.
There's probably a farmer on here that's going to send me hate mail for this. But I bring it up because I think it does them a service if they have a real conversation with their landowner to say, hey, look, let's get to a real market rate. But hey, by the way, I want a real lease. And these are the terms that protects me as the farmer, but also you as the landowner. So it's not just a, hey, it's going to cost you more money. It's actually going to give you an instrument that protects you on that farm and your farming operation long term. Because it's expensive to farm. I mean, the input costs per acre are through the roof. I know, I understand this, and what these guys are paying to farm your land, it's a significant risk every single year, not to be taken lightly. They are doing you a service in many cases, but at the same time, it's good to be market based as well and make sure both parties, have the best structure in place.
So sealed bids you'd recommend as a way to get a
It's a
best.
way to do it. Yeah, it's better than the back of the tailgate kind of thing, which has gone on for years. Um, and the times that I've done it, I've actually had farmers call me and they said, it was tough, but it was fair. Everybody, and not that everybody cares about equity, but look, agriculture is tough. It is a tough business. And by bidding some of these farms out, especially when they're premium farms, it gives the young guy who's out there that is working hard, that really wants to grow a farm, but they haven't had a chance to get a 200-acre farm because they're locked up by the big guys. So, not that, I'm not trying to pull at people's heartstrings or anything like that, but there is some equity in it that maybe gives a young budding farmer, because I've seen that happen in our region, where that guy probably never would have had a shot in any scenario of getting the farm, but he was aggressive and he ended up doing it. And the other thing is, it's not always highest price that wins the day. It is the character. It is, references, and things that go into, hey, that's a good farmer. That's a good operation. They take care of your land, which I know most farmers really strive to do that.
Another
It really
thing that
matters.
Another great thing I found with farmers is, or a thing I try to do a lot of education on, and we just had our speaker in October was on insect management in farms. Insects, of course, are super important in spraying for turkey, chick survival. If you have quail on your property, and a lot of our crops these days it was a fascinating webinar. Corn is almost all coated with a neonicotinoid pesticides. A lot of them are genetically modified, so anything eating those crops will also die. A lot of those tend to be pretty targeted pesticides. However, in her talk, it was fascinating. She did a study and found they did non pesticide crops right by the standard conventional crops, and the yields were the same. The only thing is you can, because these pesticides are so widespread across the whole landscape, you can kind of free ride for several years before those pests start moving in. But there's so much pesticide in the landscape is that the populations are suppressed, so that
Wow.
you could even get away with. She said 2 to 3 years before some of these pests will start making it onto your farm. So I found that to be really interesting for somebody who's really interested in maximizing wildlife. There are a lot of tricks like, having those discussions with your farmers. What kind of pesticides are you using, especially some of these broad spectrum ones like permethrins or pyrethroids, which are sort of an added thing, but really should only be used if you have a serious problem. A lot of times they're very inexpensive, so they're just thrown into the tank at times and they'll basically nuke all the insect diversity. So having a farmer where you can talk to them about these things and talk about pyrethroids, say, hey, can we try to manage this a little bit more? Want to save you some costs, help our wildlife out.
Yeah.
Yeah, another thing is cover crops. Building in a good cover crop program with your farmer, make sure because I find cover crops can be great food plots for wildlife. They are. All the species in Maryland cover crop program are like ideal deer food plot species you can put in, and they're putting a lot of forage on the ground in the winter, the hardest time of the year.
Yeah. I think the farmer as your partner is a good way to think about it. And the more conversations, and I think they all appreciate it. I think they all appreciate the opportunity to have better conversations with the landowners. And even if I don't think there's any reason to be shy about it, even if you're not an agricultural expert, sit down with them. learn from them. And I've found, I mean, I do that all the time because it's been whatever, a couple years since my family's, actively farmed. But I love sitting down with these guys and learning from them and listening to what their sort of, push button issues are, and, just understanding their risk. They take an enormous amount of risk every single year.
Yeah. One question came in from Margaret was the challenges of selling properties along the coastline given sea level rise and properties with marsh versus those that don't have marsh. Um,
yeah, it's a really good question. I saw earlier there was another question about the farm bill not being renewed. I was just going to say real quickly on that. So my latest guidance from my friends in Washington is that, in the continuing resolution that was just passed, the farm bill was actually continued forward. CREP is actually opening as we speak. So I thought that was really good question.
There is funding for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes it uncertain when you don't have a new farm bill. It would be nice to have some certainty around a new farm bill.
Yeah.
It does.
And I think they're gonna get to that. The sources, the people that I talk to, we will have a new bill in the not too distant future. The sea level rise question is, I mean, it's a big one. My entire natural resource career, I feel like I've been in the middle of this. I'm sure you feel the same way too, Luke. I mean, we're constantly talking about this. Our opinions as resource people, I think, all vary. I see a lot of different things on the landscape. I know, like where I grew up hunting, we lost a fair amount of shoreline, like where our duck blind was versus where it is today, over 25 years. Like I get that. But I also know where there are places on the river where there's more wetlands, there's more marsh, today than there was back then. So I think there's a lot of mixed information. And one thing I would just sort of put out there is I don't think the science is perfect. That's my opinion. I think the models are not perfect. I don't believe that, what you own today is going to be underwater no matter what. I think it's more complicated than that. And, we only have so much weather history even going back. So I think it's a very difficult conversation to predict what's going to happen in the next 50 years. But going to the practical stuff of today, I do believe, you've got to be comfortable with the real estate purchase, period. Okay. There is a farm that I represented for a couple years. There was, constant inundation, and you've got to decide what matters to you. There's no answer right or wrong about what's going to happen. And I have to defer and say, look, it sounds like I'm punting, but it is really up to the person and what they're willing. There are steps you can take to mitigate for it. You can change the way water's moving around your property, but you've got to be prepared to do that. You've got to be prepared to take those measures. And, I've been in places like, way down south where they've been dealing with sea level rise for years, and they've built berms and they've saved farms. And heck, I was in North Carolina this year, and this 6,000 acre operation is -1 elevation. And they pump water off this 6,000 acre farm, and they control soil water with water control structures throughout the growing season. I mean, it is amazing what we can do to be innovative, to keep farming and to keep using land, which I find, Luke, you and I talked about this the other day, sort of about, being optimistic about things. I find our ability to manage against sea level rise I think we can do good things and not just give up. I had a lot of experience in Blackwater a number of years ago. When the nutria, you remember this, Luke, when the nutria was eating the marsh, and we put in a water control structure in Parsons Creek. I don't know if you remember that, but we were trying to control a big part of that marsh not going to salt. But as much as sea level rise was playing a role there, the thing I learned that I was surprised about is the way the roads had changed. The hydrology of that big marsh played as much of a role as the water level changing. So we built a road, we changed culverts, we did a lot of things anthropocentrically, and it exacerbated what was happened naturally. So it was unfair to say like all of Blackwater is going down because of sea level rise. Blackwater is going down because we built roads through the marsh and through the woods too. So I think it's become very. I think it's a political football at times, and I think it's unfortunate that it gets used that way. But I think practically there's a lot of things we can do on our farms in the way we manage our farms, the way we manage our water, to protect our land, and mitigate for these factors.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and one thing that doesn't get talked about in this a lot is also subsidence, is the sinking of the earth as well as a piece of this too. And in California, a lot of that's driven by groundwater pumping. And
Right.
I've not seen a lot of studies how much groundwater pumping is affecting subsidence on the eastern shore. It seems like it could contribute in certain areas, but I tell you, I do wonder a little bit how much pumping into impoundments might exacerbate some of the subsidence or not. But that's something I've read some studies suggesting it's maybe 50% sea level rise, 50% subsidence. So there is this component of land sinking as well. It's unconsolidated coastal plain, right, where the soils are 1,000 feet deep of sand and gravel. So there's no bedrock beneath us, so it settles over time as well. But it's nice to see that it's not all lost, but something that you definitely want to be cognizant of and thinking of longer term into the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big farm in Dorchester County where they're it's 1,000 acre operation, and they are very much challenged with these impacts. But what their studies are showing, this really interesting guy that owns it, he's got access to really detailed surveying equipment, which he's used, LIDAR and all of it. And he's actually finding that their marsh is building up. They have 17 acres of higher marsh in a section of their property that is no longer inundated with water, with tide, in the same way that it was a number of years ago, based on going back and looking at things. It's a lot. It's going back to my blind story. It's really easy for me to like look at my old duck blind and go, oh well, I know we've lost 20 feet of shoreline here, but where did it go? Like, it's not, the soil didn't disappear, and it didn't all just go and fill in the bay in front of our blind. It gets dispersed. Things move around, and I think in this situation that somebody's teaching me and what they're learning on their own property. It's fascinating. I don't think there's any one right answer, unfortunately. It's interesting.
Yeah. We have a couple of other chat comments. Claire mentioned one in particular I'm going to touch on because we only have a few minutes left here, is tempering expectations from federal programs. Sometimes the values seem high. They might be a pretty high payment, $200, $300 an acre, but sometimes they also do come with costs in terms of maintenance, and they might end up costing you $100 an acre or something like that. So something to be aware of. Also, and we talked about this a couple of days ago, Ben, land prices don't match the economic value you can produce from the land. And do you want to share a little bit of your thoughts on that? And we can kind of go back and forth a little bit on that. It's very difficult.
Yeah, and I agree with Claire. I mean, I know we do need to be, not all these programs come out the way they're printed on the paper. So I respect her comments immensely. But it's a big cocktail party conversation, right? People are like, what's land worth today, right? I mean, it's like this time of year, you're staying at a Christmas party, and, you look at somebody and you go, well, agricultural land on the Delmarva, good ground, is really at $10,000 an acre. That's a number that's appeared more regularly now in just the last 5 years. And we, while we're a brokerage company and a natural resource based group, we study data. I mean, that's what we do. So I appreciate your graphs and everything that started this whole conversation off. But I mean, we have all this data at our fingertips, and I'd be happy, any of your listeners, I'd be happy to show them that. We produce what's called a land report every single year. We've been doing it now, I think, for 9 cycles. And you can see the increase in land value. And what I think is really interesting, and Luke, you and I talked about it the other day, is the delta between land value and land income has continued to increase. And the smarter people than me, economists, call this K graph. So land values go like this, and land income goes like this. It creates this K. And what's interesting about that is, like, this has been going on for probably nearly 100 years. And so it's actually not anything new. So there's no reason to call Wall Street Journal and go, oh, this is a new thing. It's not. What I do think it's a reflection of the fact that people more and more value outdoor spaces. And we vote with our dollar, right? I mean, that's what we do. We make our choices with a dollar. Where we put our financial resources mirrors our quote. I remember my economy class, they called it happiness, right? How happy does it make you defines your willingness to pay. And, when you pay $10,000 an acre for ag land, that must make you really happy. It doesn't, because you're like, man, I remember when it was just 7,000. But now you're paying 10 because you're only going to get one chance to buy that 80-acre field next to your farm. And that's really what a lot of things that drive these purchases is. It's, the continuation of agriculture in many cases. But even recreational land, like, take ag out of it. I think this proves our point better even. Take ag out of it, where there's almost zero reason why you're buying it for income. You're buying it for recreation. Yet you go down into the neck district of Dorchester County and you pay north of $10,000 an acre for a nice little waterfront farm with an impoundment and a little house. And, taking the house value out of it, we always do that. That's a thing, right? And even if it has an easement on it, you've spent $10,000 an acre, and people they scratch their head and go, that makes no sense. But not only does it make sense, everybody continues to do it over and over and over again. And I think the reason why this points directly to our point that you and I made to each other the other day. And I think it is that people value outdoor spaces and the ability to get, connected to natural resources more today than we ever have. And I think that's a cool thing. COVID changed the Delmarva, whether or not we really I think COVID changed everything, honestly, in how we value space. In 2020, we were representing a large group of timber disposition properties, probably in the neighborhood of 10,000 acres at that time. And on Thursday afternoons, we had phone calls asking if they could camp on these timber tracks because the campgrounds were full. And everybody was trying to get away from the concrete, get away from their neighbor, get away from whatever at that time. And people discovered the Delmarva from Philly and New York and all these places. And, the Delmarva is not unique. I mean, the Ace Basin in South Carolina, very similar. All these natural and wild places, and you can say, well, it's a bad thing because they're being discovered and there's more people. Like, you can go down that rabbit hole. But I prefer to look at it and go, look, people are finding great places to be for themselves, with their families, to get kids outdoors, get them off the stupid little phones that they all walk around with. That's how I think about it with my kids. But the spread between land value and land income, it's real. I don't think we're approaching some tipping point. Like I saw it presented recently in that context that we're approaching some tipping point. I don't think that makes any sense. I think we are at a point where people value being outdoors a great deal today.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll mention to the audience, there was I think a pretty foundational study in 1966 by an economist, took a couple of economists, Martin and Jeffries in Arizona, looking at ranch land values, and they were scratching their head because you could make at the time, $1 an acre on this land, but it costs $1,000 an acre. It didn't make sense for how much income you could make from the land, and
Right.
they sort of just, it was kind of obvious in hindsight, like where's this value coming from, and it was in the value of people enjoying being a rancher, and
Right.
they pay for the privilege or the ability to be a rancher on a ranch, and there's a lot of value. In a lot of ways, I think the word came up a couple of days ago. Is in a lot of ways it's priceless. When you're out on a property and the frogs are chirping and the sunset's going down, you connect to something that's beyond money in a lot of ways. Um,
100%.
and I think that it speaks to, I think, an optimistic aspect to this is that we are seeing those values in these natural places. I think that there's a lot of potential there to harness that, and that desire, and to get the education out, to get the work done, to make those places even better. So, um, well, we're hitting 103, and that was a great point to drop off on, I think.
Yeah, I think we just need to stop.
Yeah,
Let's end on a positive.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ben. Really
Yeah.
enjoyed hearing your expertise, and you can find Ben online. He's on LinkedIn. He's got a website. We sell dirt, the land
Yeah.
group, and
Yeah, that's my elevator story. So yeah, that was somebody told me. They said, I talk too much, and I was explaining to what the company does to somebody one day, and literally in an elevator, and he said, "You need to come up with something quicker than that, son." That's what he said to me, and I was like, "Well, honestly, sir, we just sell dirt." He's like, "That's good. Go with that."
someone just asked for your contact. I just put your website in the chat. So if anybody wants to reach out to Ben's group,
Thank you.
well, thank you so much, and look forward to being in touch, and keep doing the good work.
Yeah, same, Luke. Thank you for everything you do, and thanks for letting me be here today. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll see y'all in January. You take care.
See ya. Take care.